and trade unionism, as was the key pillar of the elements called economists, who thought that the workers should confine themselves to economic demands and not wage a political struggle against the Tsarist regime. Lastly, it was to fight against the reactionary elements of revisionism and sectarianism, who wanted to turn the working class party into an opportunist social democratic party and to hold back the rising wave of the movement of the workers at the time. Lenin proved that against these reactionary elements, that the neglect of theory would inevitably lead to the swamp of opportunism, revisionism, and opportunism. Lenin repeatedly stressed the close and inseparable relationship of practice and theory, the unity of theory and practice, and says it must be the cornerstone of inculcating and cultivating Marxism within the party. He also stressed the point that without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, and only a party that is guided by the most advanced theory is capable to lead a revolution. For this reason, he argued that the revolutionary party will have to build its organizational capacity, its mass capacity, political intellectual capacity to successfully engage in all fronts of struggle, particularly in the battle of ideas, in order to combat all forms of reactionary and counter-revolutionary tendencies. An element which Lenin observed as a dominant trend among the economists, or the so-called reactionary and counter-revolutionaries, was a tendency called liquidation. And such elements were, Lenin called them liquidationists, who made it their career and their business to collapse and to weaken the party from within, decimate the people's movement. And Lenin made a call that the liquidationists must be liquidated before they liquidate us. So that's the party line which all of us must follow. Those who try to liquidate, collapse, and decimate the party, they have to be confronted, be liquidated before they can liquidate all of us. What is to be done is a book of key importance for the Marxist conception of the task of the working class party. To understand the circumstances in which it was written, and as an aid to grasping its principal points, the reader should consult the history of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, Bolshevik, Chapter 1, Section 5, and Chapter 2, Section 2. In doing just that, it is a recognized and accepted proposition among socialists that socialism derives its claim to a science from the three source and component parts of Marxist scientific investigation and propositions. First is a German philosopher whose main achievement was dialectics, that is the doctrine of development in its fullest, deepest, and most comprehensive form, which led to produce dialectical materialism and its application to the study of society, which is historical materialism. Secondly is the English political economy, which is a thorough dissection and profound critique of capitalist economic structure, production, and social foundation. And lastly, the French Revolution or French socialism, whose main achievement was the Marxian introduction of the doctrine of the class struggle. All of these are formulations based on the materialist conception of history, which provides Marx-Lenin students with a theory for the deeper understanding and appreciation of historical phenomena or social development. Why materialist conception of history is so important? It is important unless if people do not want to appreciate this. do not want to appreciate the materialist conception of history and its impact on their lives. Lenin had to make this warning, as I quote. He says, people always have been the foolish victims of deceptions and self-deceptions in politics. And they will always be victims of deceptions until they have learned to seek the truth, seek out the interests of the class they belong to, or other lies and deceptions behind all moral, religious, political, social phrases, declarations, and promises. Marx's philosophical materialism alone has shown the proletariat, argued Lenin, the way out of the spiritual slavery in which all oppressed classes have hitherto languished up to this very moment. Lenin, once more, at the very embryonic stage of the Russian Workers' Party, an emerging trend of the new class of opportunism in the working class movement. A new class which was giving birth to class collaboration, class vacillation and capitulation. And this was very manifest within the group of the so-called economists, as they were called, who began their campaign by demanding freedom of criticism in the party, attacking Lenin left, right, and center, and accusing him of narrow political views. The first chapter of what is to be done is accordingly and decidedly devoted to the question of dogmatism and freedom of criticism as the main demand by the economists, the reactionaries and counter-revolutionaries. Lenin also shows that the freedom of criticism demanded by the economists means freedom to embrace bourgeois ideas, bourgeois aspirations, and bourgeois mode of thinking instead of Marxist proletariat ideas, proletariat working class aspirations, and proletariat mode of thinking. It was a demand to go freestyle, a laissez-faire of free agents as they do as they please. And that opened the way for collaboration with the bourgeoisie, vacillations, and capitulation in the process. Lenin was, of course, quick to tell these reactionary elements that were free to leave and to take the path of class collaboration, class capitation, but not to drag the party with them as they were free to go. He further shows that to confine the working class movement to economic struggle alone meant that would mean to give up the political struggle and to condemn the workers and the working class to eternal wage slavery. The economists relied on a spontaneous movement of workers protesting against bad economic conditions and considered organizing workers into political struggle as burdensome and tragic. Lenin further shows that to rely in this way on spontaneity amounts to tailorism, which means an act of tailing behind events, hiding behind protests and uprising here and there, instead of giving practical leadership, the vanguard leadership, for and in the name of the party and the working class. Political knowledge cannot arise, argued Lenin, in a working class movement spontaneously as a result of spontaneous economic struggles alone. He argued that political knowledge and revolutionary theory must be introduced, inculcated, and cultivated into and within the working class movement, the rank and file of the working class movement must be trained and educated, obtain and gain political knowledge in the revolutionary field. The economists belittle the role of theory, failed to grasp that without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. They liked the Marxist theory or revolution, but they disliked the revolution because the revolution is the people, and vice versa. They disliked the people because the people are a revolution. People become the revolution when they organize themselves and rise against the exploitative system of capitalism and make their own festival. Lenin shows that the root of opportunist ideas and the opportunist politics in the labor movement lie in the attitude of relying on the spontaneous movement and belittling the role of theory. In What is to be Done, Lenin shows concretely how to combine political and economic struggles. He says working class political struggles must be something much broader than mere trade union politics or trade union consciousness. Albeit how important trade union politics are, albeit how important trade union consciousness is, but should not be the beginning and the end. He argued that workers must be concerned with the interrelationship of all various classes and must fight against every manifestation of reaction. In advocating economic struggles alone, the reactionary elements and counter-revolutionaries, Lenin argued, sunk into reformism, buried their heads into the swamp of opportunism. Economists didn't care much to know that the struggle for reforms must be subordinated to the struggle for political freedom and socialism. They argued that the struggle for political freedom and socialism must be subordinated to the struggle for economic reforms. Lenin further points out that the roots of opportunism are buried in labor movement and trade unions. His fundamental analysis of the nature and causes of opportunism in the labor movement is summed up in his book titled Imperialism, the Last Stage of Capitalism. Lenin shows that opportunism had prevailed for decades, beginning before the birth of imperialism proper in Britain. The industrial monopoly and rich colonies possessed by the British capitalists in the pre-imperialist phase of the development was already bringing super profits, thus already producing certain features of opportunism embedded in imperialism. Lenin had to deal with this in his book titled The Collapse of the Second International. Here he defined the meaning of the term opportunism. And he said opportunism means sacrificing to the temporary interests of an insignificant and often costly sectarian interest, the fundamental interests of the masses, or in other words, entering into an alliance of a part of the section with the bourgeoisie against the mass of the proletariat. He says opportunism could arise and grow strong because the capitalists are able to make concessions to the sections of the working class leadership, as is the case in South Africa in 1993-1994, in colonial and imperialist countries, thus creating a layer of privileged strata within the working class. Here in South Africa, known as the patriotic bourgeoisie, those who work for government, white-collar bureaucrats are called comprador bourgeoisie, who enrich themselves through the tenders and so forth. The black industrialists, concept, the triple BEE type entrepreneurs. In an article, Marxism and Revisionism, Lenin analyzed revisionism, which is the theory of opportunists who continue to call themselves Marxists while revising all the fundamental principles of Marxism. He showed that the revisionists relied on the last thing, bourgeois philosophy, giving up materialist dialectics that they took up with the latest theories of bourgeois political economy, in particular correcting Marx's theory of value and denying the inevitability of capitalist crisis. And that they affirmed that democracy and universal suffrage had removed the grounds for the class struggle, arguing that there's no basis anymore to want to engage in a class struggle. There's no basis for that. Revisionism lead to giving up the aims and objectives of socialism and sacrificing the basic interests of the working class for real or assumed momentary advantages. Revisionism represents the corrosive influence of the petty bourgeois aspirations and ideas in the working class movement. In an article titled Indifference in the European Labour Movements, written in 1910, Lenin points out that the appearance of such anti-Marxist trends in the labour movement could not be accidental, but arose from the character of economic development in all capitalist countries, and reforms or reformism as a direct influence of capitalist propaganda. Instead of fighting openly against socialism, capitalists hire reactionary elements, those elements that have been bought by capital. And the capitalists have learned to advocate the gradual peaceful reform of capitalism, the patching up of capitalism through reforms. And they are utilizing such propaganda in order to divide and weaken the working class movement, co-opt their leaders, and maintain capitalist class rule and dominance. In what is to be done, Lenin further deals with questions of party organization. The key principle he talks about is democratic centralism. He stresses the need for a centralized, disciplined organization to root out opportunism and revisionism, for the practical and theoretical training of members, activists into revolutionaries, for a firm Marxist theoretical basis, because practice without theory is blind and theory without practice is terror. Lenin dealt the same blow to both opportunism and revisionism, as he described over the sides of the same coin. The opportunism of the leaders of the working class movement, Lenin observed, strengthened by the power of habit, the power and desire of normalizing the abnormal, of accepting the unacceptable, of rationalizing the irrational, which culminated in their going over to the side of capitalism to create own capitalist comfort zone in the form of BEE, as it is the case in South Africa today. Lenin tears to pieces the argument by these elements in the justification of petty bourgeois aspirations, mode of thinking, and class interests, as they were trying to justify capitulation, collaboration, for a rapacious accumulation of wealth and self-enrichment. We find on the part of the opportunist leaders in an article titled Task of the Proletariat in Our Revolution to the Third International and its place in history, Lenin concludes and makes the following point, that these reactionary elements, pseudo-Marxists and orthodox Marxists, preach socialism in words, but in practice are joining the bourgeoisie in droves in every serious dealing against the working class interest. They must be expelled from the working class party. They've got no part to roll. Close quote. On the bourgeois democratic revolution, as part of what Lenin raises in what is to be done, and the socialist revolution, the Marxist theory of class struggle is distinguished between the two, in that bourgeois and socialist revolutions are distinguished by different tasks and aims and objectives, which are undertaken by each. The bourgeois democratic revolution is in the economic sense, a desire to bring to an end all remnants of feudalism and primitive social relations, and to establish conditions for free development of capitalism from racial exclusion, ethnic marginalization, and in a political sense is to bring to an end all remnants of national oppression, and to establish universal suffrage, one man, one vote, parliamentary democracy, and equality of rights for all citizens. On the other hand, the task of the socialist revolution is, in the economic sense, to bring to an end, to smash the capitalist ownership of means of production, and establish in its place a socialist public ownership of the means of production, and in a political sphere to establish a proletarian democracy based on an egalitarian system of government and socialism. Here is a dialectical contradiction between the bourgeois democratic revolution and proletariat socialist revolution. Marx says that the task of advancing to the socialist revolution was inseparable from the task of carrying through the bourgeois revolution. I hope this doesn't cause you a heart attack. For the socialist revolution could not be victorious except on condition that the fight is to be waged for democracy and against national oppression first and foremost, and subjugation. The working class, says Lenin, as set out in Marxism, has got the task of waging the battle of the bourgeoisie, of the bourgeois democratic revolution, as a necessary step towards beginning the socialist revolution. And he makes the warning that when confronted with the democratic demands of the working class, sections within the bourgeoisie would seek to desert, abandon, and abort the revolution, betray the democratic revolution. I hope this did not cause you some mild palpitation. Marx further points out that the victory of the bourgeois revolution did not necessarily, and would not necessarily mean that the bourgeoisie must be firmly installed in power, and that socialism must remain and continue to develop over a long period. He says, on the contrary, from the battles of the bourgeois revolution, the working class must march straight onto the socialist revolution, not allowing the bourgeoisie to consolidate itself in power and to carry on the capitalist system. This theory of Marx is sometimes known as the theory of permanent, uninterrupted or continuous revolution. Let's try to avoid the second temptation of a milestone. Marx also teaches that the working class must support and push on the bourgeoisie in the fight for a democratic republic, because the latter have acquired and internalized capitalist knowledge, skills, tools and instruments with which to fight against capitalism. Something which Marx says the working class does not have such knowledge, such skills and tools. The working class, for them to acquire these skills, will have to work and learn from the bourgeoisie. He said the successful outcome of the revolution will place the bourgeoisie in power. Let me repeat this. He said the successful outcome of the revolution, the bourgeois democratic revolution, or otherwise known as the National Democratic Revolution in the South African context, will place the bourgeoisie in power. But the working class must establish its own independent class organization, its own party, and must advance its own demands and carry on the revolution until working class power is achieved. developing mass teachings in a new historical situation in the era of imperialism, as it is the case now in South Africa and wherever. A new line on the task of the working class in the bourgeois democratic revolution was advanced by Lenin in the first Russian Revolution in 1905. Lenin argued that the working class must itself take the lead in the bourgeois democratic revolution, mobilize the peasants as its chief ally. According to Lenin, the victory of the National Democratic Revolution would not place the bourgeoisie in power, but will place power in the hands of the workers and the peasants. Such power was called by Lenin the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the workers and the peasants. Once this is achieved, argued Lenin, and this is established, the principle or the leading role of the working class, once it has asserted its hegemony in carrying through the bourgeois democratic revolution, Lenin argued that, hopefully so, that having marched with the whole peasantry to abolish all remnants of national oppression and subjugation and establish a democratic republic, the working class would go forward with the poorest peasants to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat, eradicate capitalism, and build socialism. Thus, the revolution would go forward in a series of stages. The leadership and the driving force of the working class, mobilizing all possible allies at each stage, striking blow after blow. First against the remnants of feudalism and feudal landlords and autocrats, then against capitalist and economic and political positions of the capitalist class. The revolution would have been crowned by the establishment of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The vast revolution, which has been victorious in China and elsewhere and in Cuba, and culminated in independent states in the colonial world, such as in Africa and some parts in Asia, is in essence a bourgeois democratic revolution culmination, which has the special characteristics of national democratic revolution in the case of South Africa, directed against foreign national oppression and imperialism. The immediate revolutionary task in the colonial countries is not, according to Lenin, immediately to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat and socialism, but is to get rid of neo-colonialism and foreign imperialism and establish national sovereignty and people's democratic rule. Without an understanding of the nature and the task of this revolution, we cannot render its support to fulfill our own task in the fight against imperialism. Having advanced together and fighting side by side with the bourgeoisie to overthrow the old feudal system of reaction, the working class must go on with much determination to fight against the bourgeoisie itself for working class power. The aim is to strike a final fatal blow and to carry on the revolution until the proletariat has conquered state power. The question is, what is the state of South Africa National Democratic Revolution? Why is it not called bourgeois revolution? Is the working class hegemonic in this national democratic revolution? Is it leading it or not? With which other classes in society is the national democratic revolution formed and advanced? Is this so-called NDR family on course? In whose interest is it being advanced? Is it derailed? Is it completely aborted? If derailed and completely aborted, what is to be done? The answer is, it is the economic emancipation and the struggle for socialism which remains the only alternative and answers. to the failure of the bourgeois democratic revolution and the way out for the working class and for the destitute rural and urban people of this country. Just by way of conclusion, what are the principal points and lessons that we have learned about the study of the history of Lenin and his epic role in the making and agitation of revolution in Russia? What are the fundamental teachings of Marxism on the growth of the working class and its struggle, and how such struggle should be waged? What is the relations of the economy with the political struggle in this country? And how should those be waged? And how should the working class relate to both? What is the task of political leadership? In the event of opportunistic collaboration with the bourgeoisie, what the membership of the movement should do, and the necessity to fight against revisionism, opportunism of the reactionary elements within the broad socialist movement in South Africa and world over. Do we have a clear distinction of the political organization principles of the working class party? A party of a new type, which Lenin speaks about, which is distinguishable from other forms of political parties of free gentlemen. Do you understand the distinction and relationship of the bourgeois and socialist revolution and the leading role of the working class in the bourgeois democratic revolution and in the passing over from the bourgeois to the socialist revolution? What are the strategic principles of working class struggle? Uniting with all possible allies against the main enemy, and in isolating the compromising elements, reactionary elements, counter-revolutionaries. And how can the power of the masses be consolidated into a political strike as a revolutionary weapon? Perfecting the art and the skills to isolate and fight traders, renegades, and opportunists, and liquidations, and above all, those who pretend to be Marxists, those orthodox and pseudo-Marxists, who always want to abandon all efforts to preserve the legal organization of the party and combining legal and illegal. How the party can carry forward the working class struggle in a reactionary parliament. Should the parliament be rejected? Lenin says no, it should not be elected, it should be engaged. Because parliament is a site of struggle like any other site of struggle. How the party can extend its mass connection with the working class and take the lead of rising working class struggle, culminating into a revolution. Finally, how do we know if we have learned the right lessons or made the correct theoretical deductions or conclusions from Lenin teachings? We make these discussions in the middle of a coronavirus, a disease which is invisible, which is deadly, a disease that we need to fight against, spare no energy. And we can only defeat it if we are united. We can only defeat it if we observe all the measures that government has pronounced, measures such as observing social distancing, ensuring that we wash our hands as regularly as possible as we can, of ensuring that we stay home if we've got no essential service to render for our people, so that we remain safe and stay safe. This is a fight of our life, and we are going to emerge victorious against the coronavirus. Only in the practice of the teachings of the party of the new time, anchored in the philosophy of praxis and the class struggle, will tell if we have grasped, we have internalized important points, we have lessons to take home. As Marx himself expressed, he says the question of whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but it's a practical question. Man must prove the truth, that is, the reality which exists independent of man's wishes. Test his one-sidedness of his thinking in practice. The revolutionary organization can only perform its role only through an interactive dialectical relationship with the working class struggle. Because the question, what is to be done, is essentially about the unity between theory and practice, the unity between the party and the membership, the unity between the vanguard of the working class and the mass base of the working class people. Thank you so much. I hope you take some few lessons home and share with others. In a spirit of solidarity against coronavirus, long live Amandla. Thank you.